Okay, 30 seconds. I'll pick it up though.
Okay.
Let me have just the first. I'll do the switch flicker. Going live on Facebook. And here we have non-commercial radio. Yours truly, Ron Skinner at the mic, and I'm here to tell you this is indeed WRWK LP 93.9 FM. And we're broadcasting, serving Chesterfield, Henrico, Richmond, Gooseland, and Hanover. You'll find us catty corner from the Chesterfield Mall. And this is time for the Progressive Soapbox. So without further ado, let me fade in the star of the show, none other than
My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is indeed the Progressive Soapbox Radio Hour. I hope you guys are doing all right. This is the voice that will be in your ear for the next 2 hours. At least I hope it is. I can't hear it myself, so I don't necessarily know if it's in your ear or not. But I'm going to take it as an act of faith that it is. Okay. All right, I apologize, guys, for whatever kind of technical issues we might be having. Okay, now I can hear it a little bit better, I think. There we are. Now I can hear it. Guys, I hope you guys are doing all right tonight, this evening. I hope you guys have had an awesome day. This is WRWK 93.9 FM, The Work. For my YouTube audience, I want to thank you guys for joining me also. Perfect. For my YouTube audience, I want to thank you guys for joining me also. Like I said, this will be the voice that will be in your ear for the next 2 hours, giving you news, information, stuff that hopefully either you hadn't thought of or at the very least, maybe you didn't even know, seeing as you might have been at your job over the course of the day. I want to start it off with this. You can hear it in the radio itself, even if you can't see it. Take a listen to this. What is this? This is awesome. This is a symphony that's being played. You might not have known it or not, just because mainstream media has been so focused on what has been taking place in regards to the Trump impeachment that it is, for the most part, swamped everything else that has been taking place. These are Chilean protests. This is taking place in Chile. Angry, upset, neoliberal policies. Protests have also been taking place in Lebanon, Ecuador, Hong Kong, effectively across the world. I would argue that Trump being elected to some degree is a protest. I would even argue to some degree Brexit is a protest. Neoliberal policies, austerity, money is the greatest thing on a planet, even at the expense of human beings themselves. missing the point that human beings are real things. The cash itself is not. It's a totem. It's a myth. You can't eat it, can't sleep on it, at the very least not necessarily comfortably, or for that matter, for any degree of sustenance. And yet, and it's understandably so, if you're a top 1%, you would like to maximize your profit, and everything within the context of this particular system tells you that it's great and it's okay to do so. And yet real things assert themselves. Those real things get angry. Those real things start to burn stuff down. Those real things stop you from doing what you're doing in your government. Here's the catch, and it's a catch oftentimes that goes missed, not acknowledged, especially from the standpoint of media and politics for clear reasons. Your legitimacy as a government, this government, all governments, come from the public itself. And at any point along the way, the public can rescind that. Now, just because the public has that ability to do it, doesn't necessarily mean it's the easiest thing to do, doesn't necessarily mean it won't be consequences, doesn't mean that the government won't push back on that using force. But that said, it is still within the public's right to do so, again, seeing as all notion of legitimacy itself comes from the public itself that the government is supposed to represent. And how can the government claim legitimacy when it is being shut down by the population? This is an orchestra that is going with the notion of the protesters. Triumphant, organized. And my argument has always been the moment that protesters start and the moment that they feel themselves, whatever the thing that started it. Think about France for the moment. The Yellow Vest movement starts with this notion of a fuel tax where Macron is essentially putting the weight of the government, meaning the things that the government wants to do, be it environmental policy, on the back of workers, while simultaneously giving a tax cut to the top 1%. France is not like us. They have a proud tradition and a sense of being able to shut things down. They have a large labor movement, and they said no. And the Yellow Vest movement was across the board, across the political spectrum. People angry, pissed off, cops beating protesters. They're paid to do so. Interestingly enough, traitors to their class. The poor being paid to beat the other poor. In spite of the fact that many of the people in the Yellow Vest movement, even cops, backed up the protesters. You had 70 to 80% of the public itself backing those protesters. It starts off small, it grows. Hong Kong is slightly different here. It's true that Hong Kong has certain issues associated with it. Those issues tend to be economic. We cover that from the standpoint, meaning in this country, as if it's entirely an issue of China. Yes, part of that is the issue of China. Part of that is also economic malaise that has organized and pushed those people with the addition of clandestine help by the U.S. Protesters, when they start, it grows. I use that almost as a rule, not as an absolute, but almost as a rule. If the government is able to crush the protesters like they did in the United States with Occupy Wall Street, with Obama working at various state elements, then yes, you may be able to stymie and slow it down. But in those other countries, it's not looking that way. In Lebanon today, the protesters won. If you remember, and maybe you don't know this, in Lebanon, they have been racked with protests shutting down the government, with the government being unable to function due to the mass protesters. And you must understand when I say mass, because you might think of 100,000 or 10,000. I'm talking about massive amounts of people in the streets, unified against corruption. We're sick of this. We want something else. The government pushes. We're sick of this. We want something else. The government pushes. And today the government relented. Lebanese Prime Minister Saeed Harari resigns based on pressure from protesters. He comes out, gives a very short speech, and essentially says, I am going to give my resignation. We can't function with things going on the way they are. And we need to bring in something, meaning the fires of an election, or something to break this gridlock that doesn't seem to be relenting with me in office. That's extraordinary. You have no idea how triumphant this is in the various places across the world where this is taking place. Politics, the public, asserts its will. And you must understand how triumphant that is. You have a public that looks at a government that says, no dice. We're sick of this. We're tired of this. We're not going to keep this going. This has to end. And the government, at a certain point, relents. We may forget this, but there's a story with Nixon dealing with, what is his name? Kissinger. And Nixon and protesters out there for the Vietnam War, angry, perturbed, pissed off, gesticulating and yelling. And Nixon, terrified, scared, take buses and bring him around the White House and tells him, they're going to get me, Harry. Nixon was afraid of the public rescinding his ability to be in office. We don't see that much these days. We don't have a strong labor union force in the United States. Ultimately, what we see is 7% of the public being from the standpoint of unions. And beyond that point, we've seen pushback from the standpoint of teachers' unions across the United States. The GM workers coming out, going into protests, but not anything from the standpoint of a protest that shuts the government down. Interestingly enough, when Donald Trump took the action of trying to fulfill a campaign pledge on the backs of TSA agents and government workers, that would have been the time, because that got across in real clear terms the disdain that various elements in the political class have of workers. Trump was willing to do that with those workers not being paid, and willing to do that for months. Those workers stayed on that job. You realize that oftentimes they say protests and stuff happens when people have nowhere else to go. They have nothing else to lose. And interestingly enough, you also have a similar thing on the flip side of that, when they think they have just enough to lose that they don't want to give it up. In our case, in the United States, you have people who are working, sometimes multiple jobs, sometimes they have a family, sometimes they have these various things that they care about and they need, and they're barely making ends meet as it is. And protest is not something that they can do because oftentimes they don't have time to do it. And if you get arrested, it may all aggravate your job. One of the gentlemen from the Fed, he's a famous, I can't think of his name, Greenspan, made the point that, look, insecurity is somewhat of a positive because ultimately people don't have time to protest. That's a disgusting point of view, essentially keeping people so flustered and vulnerable where they don't necessarily know where they're going to get their needs met. And by the way, this is a guy who is rich 1,000 times over. There would be no situation in which his needs will go unmet. There would be no situation in which his kids' needs will go unmet. He's never going to have to worry about healthcare. He's never going to have to worry about insecurity when he gets older. Yes, he's going to die because all men die, fortunately. But there's not going to be a situation where his needs and things pertaining to his needs are met. And somebody who is, for the most part, invulnerable to need, providing that the system maintains and perpetuates itself, and I mean the capitalistic system in the United States, making that argument, I'm sorry, is outright disgusting. And yet, that was his argument. That's the way he thought. It's honest. I appreciate his honesty. Because whether he was honest about it or not, he didn't need to be honest about it. You can see it with your own eyes. A 1%er who always will have his needs met now and in the future, and whose kids will always have their needs met now and in the future, is essentially saying the vulnerability and the persistent inability to have the needs met in a comfortable way where the people within the context of the society will know that they are good from point A to point B, that is a positive of our particular system because it keeps down protests. Now, think about that for the moment. Think about what he's saying. Who does protests hurt? Are they hurting the people who are protesting? Why are those people protesting? Maybe they have good reason to protest. And his argument is, we were able to eliminate it by keeping those people in perpetual vulnerability. Across the world, that perpetual vulnerability has come to a head, and the various governments, be it Ecuador, who decided to take a loan that the public didn't necessarily want, and allow a foreign entity, not even another government, to make rules that the public didn't agree with. That government relented also. Lebanon, that government relented also. The Yellow Vest movement, that government relented also, meaning in Paris, because Macron gave over stuff, hand over fist, in order to try to stem the tide in the public will for the Yellow Vest. The Yellow Vest movement is still going on, by the way. Protests. The public's will. The public sentiment. The public choosing something else is part of life. If you're going to have a government, that government needs to have the ability, or the public needs to have the ability to rescind what that government is doing if that government is not doing what the public want. I don't mean a million people wearing vagina hats going to the White House. There are 300 million people in this country. I am talking about, however, a united front from the standpoint of workers and labor and all of this other stuff, meaning the 99%. If you are being exploited, if you have no means within the context of a political system, because that political system is magnificently corrupt, 90% of the wealth going to the top 1%, with 90% of the elections going to the people who get most of the money. These two things are related. Yes, I am transitioning to our system because I'm making the point that we, at some point in this country, should look at a number. This is 95% of the wealth. Don't take my word for it, take Obama's word for it. He's the one that said it. Going to the top 1% is horrendous. That is a level of exploitation that is profound. If Trump, or when Trump got in office, he could only beat him by 5. Just from a math standpoint, he could only beat the Democratic president who was pushing for hope and change, and gave, after pushing for hope and change, the top 1%, 95% of the wealth. Think about what I am saying. That should jar something in you. When I saw that number, the number was astonishing. Any Democrat in their right mind should have looked at that number and fell out of their chair onto the floor. That number is extraordinary, and that number is embarrassing. Hope and change, and giving 95% of the wealth to the top 1%. At which point do you get tired of that? At which point does corruption dig into you and bother you, jostle in you to such a degree that you get sick of it and you say, no, I'm done. Think of it in these terms for the moment. Whatever you do, you're on a drive time going back home. Whatever you do in the capacity that makes your ends meet, that puts food on your table, that puts your house up, that allows your kids to go to point A to point B on this trip or that trip. Whatever you do, your entire society, your entire world is entirely dependent on people who are just like you, who go and work for a wage at some particular company or do some particular task that allows our society to keep perpetuating in the way it does. Whether it's somebody pouring your coffee, whether it's somebody serving you food, whether it's somebody giving your Amazon package from point A to point B, whether it's somebody doing the streets, doing whatever. Out of all that, and whatever you take on, think about it in the sense that the 1% is entirely and completely dependent on you to do what you do for them to make the fantastic wealth that they make. Billions. And after all that you do, and despite the fact that it is entirely, your society is entirely dependent upon you to do it in order to keep the lights on, in order to keep the coffee going, in order to keep the trash picked up. Your society is entirely dependent upon you. And yet, nevertheless, a Democrat who gets in screaming hope and change delivers none, at least not in any real terms. And then they're shocked and wring their hands when Trump gets elected. How on earth can anybody justify in real terms? And understand you're in the context of a system. It's not real. Step outside of it for the moment. The biases, the things that you think about the world are almost entirely dependent upon the system to which you operate in, especially if you've never looked at the system in terms of a system. But step out of it. Human beings are real things. Perpetual lack, perpetual vulnerability. Is that really something that you want for human beings? And if you give 95% of the wealth, meaning the income, meaning what you did for a living, how you keep the world going, if 95% of all of that goes to the top 1%, standing outside of the context of that system, all of the wealth that is created, meaning the fat of the land, going to the top 1% like that, is that fair? Not within the context of a system that justifies all of this, that says this is okay, that doesn't even question this. You have people on media, millionaires, paid by billionaires, who take a certain disposition, and you can't entirely fault them for it because, after all, they're millionaires. They're working in the context of their incentives. They're paid by billionaires. They're working in the context of their incentives. But I'm asking you, the person who's listening, the person who's not a millionaire or billionaire, the person who's perpetually vulnerable, as Greenspan liked. I'm asking you, standing outside of the context of the system, is it fair that 95% of the wealth go to the top 1%? If you ask most people, they would say you should increase taxes on the rich. And the catch is, when you ask them, what do you think the skew is in regards to the wealth distribution? They often get it wrong. And interestingly enough, they get it wrong in the context of it being much, much worse than they ever thought. And even within the context of what they thought, despite getting it wrong, they still say increase taxes on the rich. Trump gave a tax cut. Obama solidified Bush's gains, meaning 80% of those grotesque Bush tax cuts that every Democrat screamed and howled about. Obama enshrined those into law. It's not one or the other, it's both. You have one party in this country. They're two wings of one party, but they're one party, and for the most part, they have a consensus on issues of finance. One just wants to rape, the other one wants to rape and touch your hair and tell you you're beautiful while they do it. But ultimately, you're still getting raped. 93.9 FM, the work. We will be back momentarily.
You are listening to the Progressive Soapbox Radio Show with Jamarl Thomas. Tune in live every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern here on WRWK 93.9 FM. You can also always listen live online at theworkfm.org. That's WORKFM.org. Check out the website and click on the link that says Listen Now. If you are enjoying the broadcast, please consider underwriting this show or one of the other great shows aired here on WRWK 93.9 FM, your radio station of, by, and for the people. Jamarl will be taking calls during the last 20 minutes of the show, so please call in to share your thoughts and questions at 6:40 p.m. The number for WRWK is 804-464-1089. And again, the phone lines will be open only during the last 20 minutes of the show, beginning at 6:40 p.m. Thanks again for listening to the Progressive Soapbox Radio Show here on your local community station each and every Tuesday from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. on 93.9 The Work FM.
WRWK 93.9 FM, The Work, is a volunteer-run independent public radio station that relies on listener support to bring you this awesome, great, spectacular programming. It takes roughly $60 a day to keep us on the air. You can assure the quality of the station by donating or volunteering. That's WRWK 93.9 FM, The Work. I also want to make the point that The Work is provided or supported by listeners like you. I want to give a shout out to Morden, Lee, Karen, Leslie, Lisa, Mark, Stephanie, Ron, Stephen, Josh, Richard, Kristen, I think this says, Marcy, and many others. I want to do a story that has bothered me to no end. I've been apoplectic on this story, and I got to be honest, I'm not quite entirely sure why I feel any particular way about the story, even though I do. I can be a hardtail. I don't want to use bad language. And to be honest, it's not really bad. There's no such thing as right and wrong. Those things are always pinned around a particular perspective of things and the goals and aspirations that you're trying to accomplish. It's not an absolute in the sense that there is some quantity that's being evaluated in a non-corporeal way. And to be honest, I don't know that as a flat fact, but I can only talk from my corporeal experience. I am unaware of an absolute in the sense of something that makes measurements and weights. We choose, and they're relative to our environment. And those things change according to our environment. I want to talk about Representative Katie Hill. Katie Hill was a representative that essentially was sex shamed. I mean, ultimately, and there are two tracks of thought on this, and both needs to be engaged, and so I will engage both because I don't necessarily want to be unfair in the way I talk about it. Katie Hill was in an open marriage. God bless her. Hashtag awesome, hashtag to some degree jealous. That open marriage, she brought on a woman where they were having essentially a perpetual threesome. I think they call it a throuple. There's nothing wrong with this. It's not right or wrong. It just is. And I even look at it and say, it is awesome that you are able to be in a relationship and explore that stuff. I get annoyed by what I consider to just be cultural nonsense. None of it is real. All of it is tradition. And despite all of it being tradition, people in this country in any country, don't necessarily look at it in those terms. They look at it entirely in the terms of absolutes. This is the way we've done it, and so this is the way we should do it. And when somebody bucks that particular trend, they point. Now, in her case, it was more than pointing. Ultimately, not videos, but pictures were released with her taking naked bong shots. There were other situations where pictures were released with her laying down with her tail out. What's wrong? What's wrong? Everything okay?
I want to make sure that we're not treading on the waters of getting kids to ask the questions of their parents. No, we don't want to be the least bit remotely suggestive. After 10 o'clock at night, you can be as suggestive as you like. Prior to that time, no.
Oh, there's no suggestive.
Okay,
into
well,
this.
just don't even touch the subject. You made the case that she was
Don't
thrown
what?
out. She's resigned, right?
Right. Don't touch the subject with Katie Hill.
Of sexuality.
Wait, you can't touch sexuality here? So if somebody was gay, you can't bring that up?
Sure, bring it up.
So if somebody's in a throuple, that can't be brought up either? What's the difference?
You don't have any kids, but imagine you had kids.
Right.
And
Okay.
one of those kids to have a normal day, listen to the radio without being thrust into adult worlds. This is where we are.
This is
if
where...
you have kids and you wanted them to remain innocent as long as you can, until they had to engage life on a different basis, that is what we are. We are.
Ron, this is literally my point. This is what you're just doing. What you're talking about right here, right now, is literally my point.
Right.
There are cultural traditions, and those cultural traditions are being broken, and people are flipping out because they're being broken. And you're, after me making that point, is like, whoa, don't bring that up. It is literally what's happening now. What's taking place with her is outright disgusting. Why shouldn't that be brought up? Explain.
Because this radio is not you and I and other adults. It is other people who will not have a context wherein it makes sense.
I understand. So let's do this. If you have kids and you have issues with bringing up adult themes, take your kids away. So wait, are you shutting down this particular dialogue? Please say.
If you'd like to say this woman was hastily cast out because of her beliefs and you think that's not cool, great, then say that.
They engaged in revenge porn and in sense of putting that stuff out to take her down.
Yes, and that's very sad. That's your point. Exactly.
It destroys her life, and it was essentially her husband and apparently the other woman that she was messing with within the context of the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's wrong?
Do you think what's wrong?
Do you think that's wrong?
I think revenge porn is unfortunate, yeah.
Do you think it's wrong that her people who she was in a relationship with work with her political people in order to attack her for it?
Of course, that's all wrong, yeah. That's you made your case.
Do you think that they're going to play this on network television, meaning CNN, MSNBC, and some of the other networks, and they're going to go into what was taking place in regards to her being taken out?
They're going to be as salacious as they can, and on cable they can be as salacious as they want them to be.
Do you think kids watch cable TV?
I think kids watch cable TV. I don't think the cable owners really care how they affect the culture, as long as they keep the ads revenue rolling in.
So
we do care how we affect the community.
Right.
We do care that we don't cross lines that would make it awkward for parents and our kids.
What line has I crossed?
To listen.
No, I'm asking. What line have I crossed?
You're doing fine.
Okay.
Just
then why are you stopping me?
We don't. I just thought we don't need to get any more salacious than is necessary to make the point.
Ron, I'm not getting salacious. I'm being very specific into what is taking place, and you're stopping me from getting and explaining what is taking place with this particular woman in regards to her being essentially destroyed politically.
Well, saying that she was destroyed politically because somebody used revenge porn, that's quite sufficient, don't you think?
No.
Okay, I do.
Okay, so do you want me to stop?
I'd like you to make your points.
Well, I'm trying to, but you stopped me from trying to make my point without necessarily knowing where I was going. If I am making the point to you that they have been using various images and everything else in order to attack this woman, I don't understand why that's negative.
I got that, and that point's been made. Well made. Yes, I was curious about that myself. In fact, I wanted to find out more about the case. It seemed odd that this one woman was singled out for having done something weird.
Why is it odd?
Why is it odd?
Right.
You single out one person for doing something?
Yes. Why is it odd? Why is that different than anything else that happens politically when you're trying to attack an opponent?
Well, politics in France has become a very nasty place to do anything. We expect you to call this time?
No.
Okay. Yeah, politics is a really unfortunate place because politics doesn't have a truth. It has power. It has overwhelm. It has all kinds of unfortunate ends, but none of those ends are social progress. And that's why I regret anything that goes into politics will not come out a useful social idea. Sadly. It's a shame. And I don't think it has to be that way.
Is Medicare for All a useful social idea?
That's one idea that you'll have to admit. If you wanted to examine...
What about expanding college?
I think these are all great ideas.
But these are political ideas. So not everything is not a non-useful idea.
Not everything is non-useful, no. The point is that if you keep score, let's say you keep score by how many dollars you bring in, then that's how you keep score. Whether or not people have college, whether or not people have anything, is not... You can't keep score that way unless you have people chastising you for getting really crazy. You get people to watch your commercials as often as possible, as reliably as possible, and the money rolls in. If people have educations, if people have social progress, if people know one end of a frack from the other, that's not something you measure, then you're not necessarily taking a role where profit and progress are married to some degree, and that's where you get useful media. Media that just sells ads and titillates is not useful media, which is why I don't want to just titillate people.
I think it's...
We'll get people to watch.
I get it, but I think it's dramatically useful to people to understand how she's being destroyed and why she's being destroyed.
I totally agree.
Okay.
And I think you made that point really well. And I was curious about it myself.
Okay, so this is Katie Hill, who has essentially been sex shamed, and essentially with this notion of revenge porn, all of these images and pictures, not to mention text messages, being dropped out into the public. On the second track, I look at this.
They did that. Who left them out there? Was it someone in her family?
I suspect it was her husband.
Wow.
More than anything else. The husband gets mad. Wait, can I bring up the fact that she had an affair? Is that also too much for kids? Is that too honest?
No, I think having an affair is pretty...
Let me ask you this. So if she's having a three-people relationship, that doesn't bother kids also? Parents don't have to explain that?
I'm sure it bothers kids.
They're not going to ask? And why does it bother kids for three people to be in a relationship?
I don't know if it bothers kids or not. I really don't. I don't have any kids myself. I'm just trying to be as...
I guess I'm making the point to you that nothing I've said has gone beyond the pale in regards to what can be played on radio, nor is it salacious. People can't see it. I haven't shown any images, nor did I go into detail in regards to what was taking place in the context of the relationship.
No.
Okay, fair enough. I just want to establish. Katie Hill, this is her resignation letter because at this point, she relented. I mean, ultimately, when you're being sex shamed, it is a difficult thing for a woman to deal with. I'm very curious if these images were put out for men, would the same thing have taken place? There's another woman who this happened to that is on the left, who was running in the political campaign. She was at a Christmas party, being young, being a woman, being a person. I'm always enamored how you can show people getting murdered en masse, but the moment that you show people having sex or talk about relationships, for some reason, that goes beyond the pale. I'm always enamored by that. And nevertheless, it's true. Crystal Ball, at one point, was her political people showed her at a Christmas party doing, I don't know, they were messing around, and those pictures were taken and displayed everywhere. And her campaign or her political opponents used that to attack her relentlessly. This is gruesome to women. I mean, this is outright disgusting what they did. 2 parts. Well, 3 parts. A, good for her that she was in part of that relationship. B, it is complicated. People's feelings were hurt when those things were over, and people with hurt feelings, went after her in her political campaign. 3, or let's say 4 things. 3, there's an ethics issue here. Now, the ethics issue would take place whether it's a man or a woman in regards to messing with people who are on your staff. And that's the ethics investigation that was going on one particular track, meaning, look, you can't mess around with your staff like this. We have rules about you messing around with your staff like this. And I think that's a fair point. I've been hit with that particular point, and that's fair. By the same token, what they're going after her for has less to do with ethics and has more to do with salacious, essentially, revenge porn. And I was bothered greatly by this. This is a person, and the ethics investigation required none of the photos, requires none of the text messages, none of that stuff was necessary in order to make the case that she breached ethics. It was done entirely for ratings, for views. Essentially, look at this particular person is a congressman, and there you go. I got to be honest, I don't know how on earth she thought she was going to make this work. Let's say there was nothing going on from the standpoint of her cheating. Let's say her husband is not upset. Let's say the other woman is not upset. It's still known. Like, this is stuff that your political opponent would use against you, even if you didn't have the other stuff bothering you. And yeah, it becomes somewhat of a difficult thing for her to do politically in order to make that work, despite the fact she's not doing anything wrong in the overt sense of forcing or pushing or using her position in order to push this through, meaning in order to have these relationships. This is her. It's a broken heart that today I announce my resignation from Congress. This is the hardest thing I've had to do, but I believe it's the best thing for my constituents, my community, and our country. See my official statement below. I don't think we necessarily need to see the official statement. I think we get the point. She has quit. And I got to be honest, it bugs me that she had to quit.
Yep.
Bugs me greatly.
I agree.
Look, alternate relationships happen. Whether that's gay, whether that's a lesbian relationship, whether that's a transgender relationship. And I would argue that all of those things are complicated in order to explain to kids. If you're going to explain to kids what transgender relationships are, if you're going to explain to them what it means for being a lesbian or gay, at this point, those have become more acceptable. And because they become more acceptable, they get somewhat of a blind spot in realizing that these are alternate relationships from the standpoint of a man and a woman. Having a throuple, or whatever they would call it, is the same to me. It sucks. I don't like it. Yes, it breaches ethics. By the same token, this is a person, and that person was essentially eaten alive. I feel bad for her. And I gotta be honest, my heart goes out for her. And I gotta be honest, I don't know why I connected to the story, but I saw this story going back for almost like a week. And you could see how it was just kind of rolling along and getting more cacophonous and more salacious as it went on, and as more and more stuff was leaked. I don't know what she's going to do after this. I don't know if she's going to get in politics. I don't know what she's going to do. But at the very least, this chapter of her life has been closed. 93.9 FM, The Work. This is Jamarl Thomas of the Progressive Soapbox. And one of our community friends and supporters is the Thrifty Quaker store. Good. I was looking for this. Corner of Midlothian and Coalfield Road in Midlothian Station Shopping Center. During October, they will be raising money for the Chesterfield Domestic Violence Task Force. Excellent. They support efforts to provide financial assistance of survivors of domestic violence so they can get emergency housing and helping find safety and pay for transportation and utilities. Take the reusable to them and give twice. You can even buy stuff. That's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing.
Great, folks. Yeah.
WRWK, supported by Thrifty Quaker. We'll be back momentarily.
You are listening to the Progressive Soapbox Radio Show with Jamarl Thomas. Tune in live every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern here on WRWK 93.9 FM. You can also always listen live online at theworkfm.org. That's WORKFM.org. Check out the website and click on the link that says Listen Now. If you are enjoying the broadcast, please consider underwriting this show or one of the other great shows aired here on WRWK 93.9 FM, your radio station of, by, and for the people. Jamarl will be taking calls during the last 20 minutes of the show, so please call in to share your thoughts and questions at 6:40 p.m. The number for WRWK is 804-464-1089. And again, the phone lines will be open only during the last 20 minutes of the show, beginning at 6:40 p.m. Thanks again for listening to the Progressive Soapbox Radio Show here on your local community station each and every Tuesday from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. on 93.9 The Work FM.
It's because we share our universe with
93.9 FM The Work. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am your host for the Strive Time Hour. It is 5:41. At 6:30, we will be taking calls. So if you have anything to say, to comment, I suck, I'm awesome, anything in between, or anything about the subject matter itself, feel free to call at 6:30. Yeah, 6:30, about roughly less than an hour. So I am one of those people who like polls. Now, it's not so much that I give them overwhelming value, because polling is like anything else. It depends on who you talk to, who is in that poll, and sometimes polls can be deceiving, intentional or not. However, I do like trend lines in various polls, and those trend lines tend to give some kind of context to what's going on in the race. Frontrunner Joe Biden is begging for money, and not just begging for money. And don't get me, this is still within. It's in my point. I have a point. Joe Biden has been begging for money. His contributors are terrified that this quote-unquote frontrunner is going to run out of cash. Now, 33% of the people who donated to Joe Biden have maxed out. Think about what that means. That means that Joe Biden is trying to essentially get money from people, the fat of the country, the 1%ers, and they are being tapped out. For comparison, Sanders, 3%. 3% of the people that's given Sanders money have tapped out. Now, the obvious reason is because the majority of the people who are supporting Sanders are poor and people of color. And they don't have the ability to essentially tap out in order to give to a political campaign. So they give small donations, in which case Sanders can go from month to month to month to month with a funding mechanism that doesn't require him to take money from the top 1%. If he is not taking money from the top 1%, do you believe that he would represent in entirety the top 1%? Meaning, under Obama, when 95% of the wealth goes to the top 1%, what does that look like under Sanders? Do you honestly believe that he would give that, have that particular dynamic? And my point is that if Biden is out there begging for cash, who do you think he is going to represent? Biden has also recently started a super PAC, something he said he was never going to do, or to really supported a super PAC. Now, the question that the media should have asked is anybody in your campaign reaching out to anybody else in order to kind of make this work? The lobbyists, the people of wealth. I've seen Joe Biden's campaign floundering from the standpoint of cash. He only has $9 million on hand compared to Trump and the Republican Party that's raised $130 million over the last quarter and has broke records in regards to September. Rah-rah impeachment. They're terrified that Biden is going to run out of cash. They're terrified that this frontrunner can't do what the other campaigns, be it Sanders or Warren, has been doing, and that is raising cash. And this is also, again, with him going to big-ticket donors. When you look at what is taking place in New Hampshire, one of the polls, CNN recently released a poll. Now, CNN has not necessarily been the kindest to Bernie Sanders, and some of these polls that they've been releasing have been somewhat dodgy. Just, it's like we're going to talk to older people. When you have older people in spades going for Biden, well, that creates a dodgy situation in regards to the way the numbers are going to look. CNN has done a poll. New Hampshire. I want you to take a look at this. This is Real Clear Politics. The CNN poll shows that Bernie Sanders has taken the lead in New Hampshire, 21 to Warren's 18. That's a jump for Sanders by 3. Yeah, that's a jump for Sanders by 3. Now, interestingly enough, on this, Warren has pulled into the number 2 spot. Again, she's not doing bad. And you have a situation where Biden has fallen to number 3. Now, I was at the clinic today, and so I was stuck watching media, while I was working on getting this stuff ready for the show. And I watched CNN much of that day, and at no point did I realize that Sanders had taken the number one spot. How phenomenal. How phenomenal. I heard Biden falls to third. I heard Warren and Sanders, doing well in New Hampshire. But at no point did I hear CNN say Sanders was in the number one spot. All of these articles, Buttigieg in fourth, but a strong fourth. We're talking about the same poll. This is historically unprecedented New Hampshire mess. Again, early state primary voters much more undecided than voters thought, than voters nationally. A disappointing poll for Biden. I had another poll. Biden falls in the third. Sanders, not doing well, tumbles into the number one spot in New Hampshire. You might as well say it, because that's essentially doing everything in your power, doing backflips, twisting yourself in knots, not to say what's reality. Sanders, up to 21% in New Hampshire. Warren, down 18% in New Hampshire. Biden, down, give me a guess, Ron.
15.
9.
9.
Down 9.
Wow.
Now, you could have written this article and said, Sanders regains the lead in New Hampshire. Sanders takes number one in New Hampshire. Sanders and Warren within, margin of error, number one. You could have written this in all sorts of ways, but they broke their back to say anything but that. I'm going to give you another interesting tidbit. 40%, or only 40%, chose establishment candidates. Everybody else is Warren and Warren and Sanders. And I'm saying this for the real Clear Politics average, meaning the average of the last few polls that were released in New Hampshire, 60% go towards Warren or Sanders, meaning supposedly the two lefties in a race. The other X number of candidates only pull up 40%. Isn't that fascinating?
Yes.
I mean, think about what 2008 was. Think about what they were talking about in 2008. Obama brought up public option, but eventually ditched it almost immediately. And you could not get anything beyond that point. And, even talking about anything beyond that point, you, at this point, have two candidates. Whether Warren believes it or not, she's saying it, which means at the very least she acknowledges that the public is on board for it, pushing Medicare for all, expansion of college, expansion of Social Security. Sanders has gone so far as call for a Green New Deal. They want to dump, 20 or how many ever $1 trillion into the environment. And Warren, even though she's not going to go that far, she's talking about going that way. This is extraordinary. Bernie Sanders is talking about transforming, literally a transformational presidency, and Warren, aping him, has been talking about, at the very least, mouthing something similar. And the public itself has said, that's what we want. Now, when you ask Democratic voters, has the Democratic Party moved too far to the left? Overwhelmingly, no. They say no. If you ask independents, majority say no. I don't care what Republicans think. They're not even on the spectrum in this case. I guess the point I'm making to you is, after Hope and Change, and I would argue, you can say thanks Obama for this. I will give Obama credit for this. He broke the cherry of the United States, meaning in regards to the political spectrum. Obama says, I want hope and change. Obama recognizes that the public wants something fundamentally different. He plays into it. The public says, yes, we put him in office. First black president. Yes, he's black. He's definitely going to do something amazing and transformational. He has a Muslim name. And not so much. No dice. And so now Trump comes in and Hillary comes in. And Hillary says, I'm going to give you another term of Obama. And Hillary doesn't go to Wisconsin, doesn't go to many of these states. Pied Piper's strategy with Trump, pumping him up to make it look as if he's a contender, and believes that she can beat him. And WikiLeaks, one of the things they released in the emails, does it bother anybody that Trump seems to be the only person we can beat? And they lose to him. Now, part of this, I would argue, is because the public was hyped up, pushed up, got in their mind of hope and change. And then you're stuck with this evaluation after the fact of, did I get hope and change? Now, the catch is, what does that mean? I have no idea what that means, which is kind of the point. It's vague. It's like a Pepsi commercial of sorts. It's an advertisement campaign that people bought onto because they thought he was going to enact some kind of real thing. Obamacare has brought several people into the healthcare space. And he should be given credit for that, despite the fact it's a right-wing plan. He didn't push for more. He didn't try to put more. And ultimately, you got a Democrat. And if you listen back to Obama's old speeches, even though you felt euphoric, he didn't really say anything, which is the rub. The public didn't want sugar. They wanted something substantial. And Democrats, who going back to JFK saying, I'm going to put a man on the moon, and they didn't even have the technology to do it. And here, right now, with the Democratic Party, you have elements of that party that is trying to push for big things, visionary things again. Whereas the other Democrats, not so much. And when they get the choice, and the public get the choice, they said this right here, this is what we want. It's also interesting to note that in New Hampshire, Democrats, Republicans, and independents can vote. Meaning, my argument, and a lot of people's argument, has been indies would probably choose a Sanders type. But indies in many of these states can't vote. So if you're doing polling of Democrats in various states, you might have a depressed vote from the standpoint of Sanders. When you allow people from a larger context to vote, they choose the lefties. Think about what that means from the context of an election. Who is going to be voting in the election? Only Democrats or everybody else? And if you're looking to try to win and try to win those votes, win those voters, are you going to go for big things or are you going to go for small things? If Joe Biden can't raise money, if Joe Biden can't fill a doghouse, if Joe Biden has difficulty and is out there literally begging for money and establishing, or at the very least, okaying and giving permission to establish super PACs, why is that not problematic? And why does that not draw red flags? Donald Trump is selling out stadiums, thousands and thousands of people. Joe Biden can't fill a doghouse. I put to you that back in 2016, when Hillary Clinton was running against Trump, all of the Democratic media thought that woman was going to win. Polling. And if I'm being honest, the polling wasn't entirely going in a particular direction, but they were looking at that stuff in very specific ways in order to cut the opinion in a particular way. They were wrong. She lost. And you can look at what's happening now from the standpoint of the money that Trump is raising, the money that the RNC is raising, the money that they have on hand compared to a Democratic Party that is broke, for a technical term. And Biden, who has barely any money on hand, is now relying on millionaires and billionaires to essentially get him over the finish line. Red alert, red alert. It should bring warning signs. If nothing else, I would say the polling in New Hampshire is close. And Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and there's one other, I believe, Nevada. Those states are going to be close to one another. Biden has accepted that he can lose all three. But I hate to point this out. Electability is a fickle mistress. I've said it before. I've said it again. People believing that you're electable in this is the crux of Joe Biden's problem. People who believe you're electable just believe you're electable. And in which case, they will vote for you if it came up for a vote. I want that guy. I think that guy can beat Trump, so I want that guy. That doesn't get people to send you money, nor does that get people to come out to go to your rallies or your stadium or anything else. It only means that I think the guys can beat Trump, so I'll vote for that guy. That's somewhat of a problem. You screaming electability, your wife screaming electability. What about policy? I know you've been pushing a certain degree of policy, the centrist policy, but the fact that you're screaming electability to some degree gets across that the notion of policy is lesser. You know, Clinton, if Biden fails, there's been talk that she get back into the race. Now, I'm not necessarily entirely clear about that. I don't think she gets into the race in the sense of Biden being in it, because I think they just split the vote and she doesn't have a lane. But if anything happens to Biden, and you had all of these other plutocrats, oligarchs, looking for other candidates to take over if Biden can't make it. Essentially anybody, Lord knows, anybody, please God, anybody but Sanders. Even Warren they didn't trust because they thought she'd lose to Trump. I think they're right on that point. I think she has... The problem with the way the Democrats are running the primary right now is that they don't necessarily test the jaw of the other candidates. Understand why. Absolutely. The last thing you want is Donald Trump using something that you did in an attack ad to attack one of the other candidates. That will be horrendous. By the same token, you have no idea how your candidate stands up to scrutiny if you don't scrutinize your candidate. And the stuff that is lurking in Warren's shadow, and God forbid Biden's shadow, Trump comes out. I'm the one that's been getting people out of prison where Joe Biden was putting people in prison. I'm the guy that is bringing our troops home and pulling our troops out. They're the guy that want to keep those troops in the place. He will talk about Biden's mental capacities. He will say he's sundowning. He will say he's not bright. He will call him slow. He will say he's losing his mental and cognitive functions. And those are things that Democrats have shied away from. He will call Hunter Biden corrupt without a hint of hypocrisy or irony about saying so. He will say Biden was corrupt his entire life. He would say Hunter Biden in Romania is horrendous. He would say Hunter Biden in Ukraine is horrendous. And nobody in their right mind believes that a crackhead gets a job in the Ukraine with no experience in the Ukraine and no experience in oil and gas, and that this was done above board. He would talk about the stuff that he was doing in the sense of the loan stuff, meaning the bankruptcy bills that Biden was working, and essentially to keep people in debt while his son was working at a company that would have benefited from it. And of course, leaving the moment that Biden gets the legislation through. Biden Inc. This will be brought up. And whether you realize it or not, it would neuter any attack on Trump from the standpoint of corruption, because it will be to some degree of a wash. I've heard people use this term soft corruption. I have no idea what that means. Either it's corrupt or it's not. And he seemed to have a habit of corruption going throughout the course of his career, with either his family members, his brothers, or his kids using his name to get positions that they otherwise wouldn't have gotten. I don't know any crackhead that gets a job making $50,000 a month in a foreign country when they have no experience in those utilities or duties. My point is this: a vote for Biden is a vote for Trump. And I've warned, I've said it again, I used to warn for Clinton, and I am red alarms, red alert. Now, I am not a person who wants Trump elected, even though I dislike the Democratic Party in general. I am terrified of what Trump is going to do in that next election, and I strongly suspect that Social Security and Medicare are on the chopping block, not to mention the environmental stuff and so forth. By the same token, a vote for Biden is a vote for Trump. The election is not entirely dependent upon me or people of my disposition. There is an entire country, independents, Republicans, that are not Democrats, that are not stuck in the echo chamber of the Democratic Party, and that will go out and will vote for Trump and put him back in that office. I've seen the metrics on this with groups that have been pretty consistent and pretty right, going back to the 80s. I think they missed one. Red alert. Red alert. This is WRWK 93.9 FM, The Work.
You are listening to the Progressive Soapbox Radio Show with Jamarl Thomas. Tune in live every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern here on WRWK 93.9 FM. You can also always listen live online at theworkfm.org. That's WORKFM.org. Check out the website and click on the link that says Listen Now. If you are enjoying the broadcast, please consider underwriting this show or one of the other great shows aired here on WRWK 93.9 FM, your radio station of, by, and for the people. Jamarl will be taking calls during the last 20 minutes of the show, so please call in to share your thoughts and questions at 6:40 p.m. The number for WRWK is 804-464-1089. And again, the phone lines will be open only during the last 20 minutes of the show, beginning at 6:40 p.m. Thanks again for listening to the Progressive Soapbox Radio Show here on your local community station each and every Tuesday from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. on 93.9 The Work FM.
All right, so let's get back. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is WRWK 93.9 FM to work. And guys, just so we're clear, I was just notified about the voting thing and not telling people who to vote. My objective in no way is to tell people who they should vote for. People vote their conscience. They choose who they want. There are various people who may choose Trump for all sorts of reasons. I don't begrudge them for voting for Trump. I don't begrudge them for voting for Jill Stein. I personally voted for Jill Stein. I am not a party person. So any disagreements that I have with Trump are entirely of ideology, and I give you that ideology in advance. I don't particularly like him. Why would I? Based on my own political leanings, why would I like Trump in this case? By the same token, I think I've been infinitely more fair to him than most people I talk to, especially most people who are Democrats. And I have to be honest, between talking to Trump supporters and Democrats, I would rather talk to Trump supporters. They are much easier to talk to. Democrats, for the most part, have been... And you know what? Let's go into it this way. Let's talk about it in these terms. So this is 2016. Take a look at this. Come on.
Died young. They would be immensely proud of their son and his accomplishments. They loved him.
Democrats.
They loved the New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt and would be especially proud that Bernard is renewing that vision. It is with enormous pride that I cast my vote for Bernie Sanders.
This is 2016. Sanders, weeping. You cheated my guy. The Democratic Party cheated my guy. This is why I think it's funny that people say I'm anti-Trump. I am anti-Trump. I'm also anti-Democratic Party and anti-Republican Party. They cheated my...
Who do you love?
Well, it's not so much who do I love. My ideology, I give it in advance. You know where I stand, as opposed to media who's not objective and feigns objectivity. I don't do that. I tell you exactly where I stand and why I support a particular horse that's in a particular race. These are my political leanings. They cheated my guy. Read Donna Brazil's thing. They cheated my guy.
Yeah.
They dragged him before the DNC in a crate, like those old Roman legions bringing back while they threw potatoes and eggs at him. And while we wept, Sanders supporters openly wept in this moment. And Sanders himself, as he was being dragged before the DNC, openly wept himself. And while we wept, they laughed. The DNC, the Democratic Party, laughed. You cheated my guy, and then you laughed. Fair enough. It cuts, it hurts, it burns. And yet, it's empowering. You should know your enemy, and you should know where you and where they stand and the limits to which, or the rule set to which they are working by. And the rule set that they were working by in 2016 has not changed. The DNC went into court and said we can steal and cheat or cheat in a candidate if we wanted to. We could pick a candidate and smoke for a room if we wanted to. They said this literally as a defense that they were that they committed fraud. Now, the reason that people said they committed fraud is because you told us this process was impartial, breathlessly, over and over and over again. It's impartial, it's impartial, it's impartial. How dare you say it's not impartial? And then, oh my God, WikiLeaks, oh my God, Brazil, and you find out it wasn't impartial. Meaning, I donated to somebody when the fix was already in. By definition, it's fraud. If you're telling me A, and you're doing B behind my back, and I find out that you're doing B behind my back, and I was sending you money to something where the fix was in, well, you were being dishonest to me in order to elicit money from a fundraising standpoint. That's a problem. That's a big problem.
Yep.
The catch here is democracy and capitalism rests uneasy. It always has. If I am part of the 1%, I want to maximize my profit. The problem is that there are people in the country who I am maximizing my profit by exploiting their labor. Well, you can't have it both ways. In a democratic process, the democracy or the democratic order makes rules. They may raise taxes. They may say you can't dump your product in that water, that lake. They may say that you can't pump this stuff into the atmosphere, into the sky, when we, the public itself, is going to have to pay for it. The 1% doesn't like that. They want to maximize their profit. These things sit uneasy. The catch here is that in our system, in our order, we allow corporations and pretend as if something that is not real is a person. It is disgusting on its face. And yet, this is the system to which we have. The top 1% are able to dump loads and loads and loads and ungodly sums into our political campaigns, meaning the democratic order, in this case where capitalism and democracy sits uneasy and where people supposedly get a choice in who they want to support and who they want to vote for, ultimately so do corporations. And they have interests. And again, capitalism and democracy sit uneasy. Their interest is going to be for that, their own class. And there's the rub. Despite having a democratic process, corporations can dope loads of money. You can have swamp the airwaves. And candidates, even if they want to get elected for the most part, have to raise huge amounts of cash, meaning that even the bar of entry is entirely dependent upon the amount of money that you can raise. And typically, the Democratic Party and Republican Party have essentially been taking money from ultimately the same sources. And at the very least, same class. Who do you think they'll represent? And why don't you think they will represent the people of means who they are entirely dependent upon in getting elected? 95% of the wealth went to the top 1%. And elections, 90% of them are chosen by the side with the most cash. Think about what I just told you. Oligarchs, American oligarchs, are effectively choosing candidates based on the people who they dump loads and loads of money into. And I ask you the very basic question of who do you think those candidates will represent? You have a media space that essentially millionaires sitting on television telling you what you should think and what's important in regards to stories. And who do you think they would frame that around? Meaning, what do you think the framing of that stuff is going to be if they have personal self-interest? Not so much because there's anything nefarious going on, maybe not. Media has their own political contacts. They've become stenographers of government. That part is true. But also, they are members of a particular class and have a certain disposition in that particular class. And the stories and the things that they talk about revolve around it. It would be weird if it didn't. And now you go to politics, and you get, even in the Democratic Party, superdelegates. And superdelegates haven't gone anywhere. When the moment that the DNC came out and said, we're getting rid of superdelegates for the first round, my first thought was, well, wait a minute, they're still there. And why do you believe that there won't be a second round? And the closer and closer we get to this election, it looks like there may actually be, who knew, color me shocked, not a second round. 22 people jump into a race. It looked like a clown car. And you have the top 3, Biden, Sanders, who represent essentially the real deal in regards to centrist or progressive. And you have this other factor who's aping Sanders. Now, the interesting thing about this, from the standpoint of the race, someone asked what happens if they cheat Sanders again. And someone else chimed in that they're already cheating him. Look at all of the other factors that are allied against him, that despite this supposedly being a democratic order, all of these levels are against. And all of these levels have either huge amounts of money to swamp the airwaves with, or for the most part, push candidates that would be against the interests of Sanders. My point is this. Is it possible that Sanders is cheated? Yes. And I don't understand why that question is difficult to engage for some. My interests, my own personal interests, you vote whoever you want based on your own ideological beliefs, is that my push is for Sanders. Now, my focus is not so much on this notion that Sanders will be cheated, but I think it's something to be engaged, seeing as it happened prior, that it should be, at the very least, intellectually engaged, and intellectually engaged honestly. It is possible because it has happened once before. Looking back, or looking forward on this front, I think there should be 3 things that take place. I think it should be very clear and understood that if Sanders is cheated again, and again, legitimately so, that A, you should attack Sanders. Now, I don't mean this violently. I just mean this in this sense. That if Sanders is cheated, and he does what he did in 2016, where he comes out and says, vote for the person that was vomited up in this process after the cheating, and the crowd disagreed.
Right now, we have got to defeat Donald Trump. And we have got to elect Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine.
Notice that sustained roaring. This is a guy who they've been running around the country with.
Brothers and sisters,
Tens of thousands. And for roughly 45 seconds, they boo him. Boo him to the point where he can't even get a word out. He just stands there, painfully takes it.
I think they were booing history and booing the betrayal.
They were booing the betrayal. The fact that he was cheated, and the fact that he turned around and said, support the person who cheated me. That's their perspective.
Was there any choice?
Well, he did have a choice. Everybody has choices. I mean, the question becomes, what's the political force on you to take one choice or the other, and the incentives that push people into one choice or the other? I don't begrudge Sanders for this, even though I hated it. I got it. And if I'm being honest, you can make a case that he made the right choice, considering that he's running in this race, he's nearly winning this race, and he's been able to change the shift and the tint of at least the things that were being talked about, despite how difficult this was to accommodate. My argument would be, if he is indeed cheated, and I gotta be honest, the media and stuff like that, you don't really have any control over that. Any candidate that runs in a race, media would be part of it. And not just media, corporations that are gonna dump billions into the race in order to stop that candidate. Yeah. Why wouldn't they? Every incentive in the world is for them to do that, because that 95% of the wealth to the top 1%, they don't want to change that. Why would they want to change that?
Yeah, really.
My focus more so is talking to everybody else, about people of a particular class that don't like that number and does want that number change. My catch here is, if Sanders loses, not just loses, cheated, and I put emphasis on the term cheated, not no BS stuff. I'm talking about Donna Brazile coming out. You're seeing, you can read in the WikiLeaks stuff. I'm talking about clear cheating. I get monkeying around the edges from the standpoint of media and from the standpoint of corporations dumping huge amounts of money. But in the political process itself, we have all of these hurdles. He has to be rejected. It's not so much that you reject what he was pushing for. Your ideology is your ideology. If you believe people shouldn't go, die in the street without health care, that doesn't change just because Sanders has cheated. More so an outright rejection in the sense that we don't accept, A, that you were cheated, and B, that you turned around and supported that person. And this goes to my second point, an outright rejection of whatever is vomited up in that process. I find this to be somewhat of a big deal. And the third point, burn stuff down. Now, I don't mean that literally. I just mean in the sense of protests. And you must understand why I'm saying this. Your democratic order is breaking down. It's happening in slow terms, and you're part of the country, so all of this stuff seems like political processes, but this is abnormal in regards to what is taking place in our elections. You had an election when Obama was elected with the Republican Party that outright rejected anything that Obama put out, even if it was stuff that they themselves are backing. Hey, let's go with this Republican healthcare bill. Boo! No, we don't want that. Wait a minute, this was your bill. Yeah, we're against it now. Policies that the Republican Party should have jumped on from the standpoint of stuff that they were pushing, outright rejection. We're going to have unilateral, complete rejection, unanimous rejection of whatever Obama put out. They decided it. Day one. Obama was out celebrating. They were out deciding on what they were going to do, and their position was rejection. Their reasoning was entirely political. When JFK got elected, what is his name? The cowboy comes out and says, he's not my president, but I'm going to support him. Wayne. He's not my president, I'm going to support him. Why? Because the ideal of America in and of itself mattered more the partisan politics that these guys engage in. You can engage in a sport providing people understood and kept to the rules of the sport. Meaning if somebody was playing football, somebody pulled out a gun and shot the guy, people will be aghast. Yes, it breaks the rules, but it breaks the rules in even human terms of something that you're doing. I'm saying politics is similar. The rule set of the game in football matters more than them winning the game. Ergo, they play by the rules and they try to have good sportsmanlike conduct. But all of that is because it's a game space that has a rule set that all of them agree on the rule set and they agree that the game itself matters more. Politics is no different. You have two sides. And the country itself and the well-being of the country itself is supposed to matter more. Your democratic order, however, breaks down when that no longer is true. When the myths that keep all of this stuff together, meaning the parties, that despite having political differences, that they are ultimately working in the best interest of the country. The moment that stops being true, your political order breaks down. And I am making the point to you that that is literally what is taking place. Republican Party decided they weren't going to work with Obama. Outright, didn't matter what the country was in the best interest. Even Merrick Garland, who Obama was supposed to get that pick, they would put a year and did not allow him to get his rightful Supreme Court pick. That's extraordinary. They wanted to crash the country, not allowing the debt ceiling to increase, despite the fact that when Trump got in office, they raised it, if I'm not mistaken, by $10 trillion. This is extraordinary. So Trump gets in office, and Democrats, upping the ante, decide to not accept the election and call him a Putin puppet, say he got in office by Russia despite not having evidence for that. Intelligence services leaking information to try to damage the president. The Democratic Party working with the Ukrainian government in order to, again, ding the president of the United States. And Trump gets in office, and what do? We need to have an investigation. Many other people wanted to impeach right off the bat. Didn't matter. Rashid Tlaib gets in office and says, I'm going to impeach this mofo. That's what she told her kid. Day one, I have a crush on Tlaib, so I don't say this, in the sense of trying to ding her. I'm saying this in the sense of that's how she got in office. I am going to impeach this president. The other woman from California, same thing. I am here to impeach this president, young man, and then threw Michael Tracy out the way. Michael Tracy is a journalist. My point to you is that they were canned response. The Democratic Party at no point accepted the election and instead engaged the country in a conspiracy theory for the last 3 years, screaming and hollering about Russia.
Well, we know Russia was...
We don't know anything. I don't know anything.
We know Russia was very...
I don't know that.
Sure, there's a...
Wait, just so we're clear. That's not we, that's you. You think that. I don't know that.
There's a huge amount of evidence that Russia has thousands of people employed 24/7 to distort...
So does the United States.
Yes, we do. But that's
so does Israel.
That's not the question.
So does the UK.
The question is the U.S. We are being affected by people, and Russia has the most to gain.
How?
How? Well, who gets a private audience with the president with note keeping? Vladimir Putin does. It just smells really...
Your logic... Wait. Your logic of this is that you know something's going on with Russia because Trump gets a meeting with Putin?
Because
Explain.
How many people have meetings with the president where zero notes are kept?
I don't know.
Guess.
I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you one, very prominent one that does, or did. And won't mention it.
Do you know another one?
No, I don't know any other one.
Have you engaged in regards to looking over Obama or many of the other presidents and how they engage? Ronald Reagan had a meeting with Gorbachev and didn't have anybody else around when they were talking about the nuclear stuff.
There probably are lots of cases of it, but
wait. But you just said your argument was who gets a private audience without any of that stuff. I gave you a case, and you say you may be a lot of them now. Initially, you said there were none.
I don't know of a lot of them, but I know that in the case of Mr.
But Ron, I just gave you one.
There was a national meeting, and at the national meeting, there was a private meeting with no notes kept.
Ronald Reagan also had a private meeting with Gorbachev to talk about the nuclear stuff.
Yeah.
Is Ronald Reagan also a Putin puppet or a Russian puppet?
Ronald Reagan was certainly a mixed bag, but he was a great poker player. And he played much better poker than Gorbachev did. Gorbachev, as you probably know, Russia didn't do well as Gorbachev backed down. In fact, Gorbachev's number two man.
They lost hundreds of thousands of people with that shock capitalism that Yeltsin put through with Bill Clinton running a political ad to try to get Yeltsin in office because Yeltsin was a drunkard.
Yes, it was awful.
I don't understand the logic of this. Ultimately, Donald Trump, you believe is somehow a Putin puppet. I have no idea why you think that.
Well, if you look at Mr. Trump's record, he has a consistent record for the last.
Let me ask you this. So when we're talking about the nuclear treaty stuff, meaning him getting rid of the nuclear stuff, the intercontinental ballistic missile treaties, is that positive to Russia or not?
I'm sorry, you mean Reagan's?
No, Trump. When they got rid of, meaning Trump pulls out of the intercontinental ballistic missile treaties with Russia, is that positive for Russia or not?
Well, that was an unfortunate thing for mankind.
But is it positive for Russia? Each country has their own political aims and ambitions. You're saying that he's a Putin puppet. I'm asking you. I'm engaging your argument. Is that a positive development for Russia that Donald Trump pulled out of the ballistic missile treaty? I'm telling you, Russia didn't want it. Now that anyone else around the world
didn't want to pull out of the treaty.
No, they didn't want him to pull out that treaty. That treaty has been in place for God knows how long. Elements, neocons in Trump's office was against pretty much any of those type of treaties. And when Trump got in office, he started pulling out of those treaties. That has made the world that much more dangerous.
Yeah, I think it probably wasn't a good. Personally, I think it was a good idea. I don't really know that much about the area. So
Russia was against it.
Can't take a lot of opinions.
I'm just saying, Russia was against it. As a flat fact, Russia was against it. What about Venezuela?
It's unstabilizing. Yeah.
What about Venezuela? Venezuela was friend to Russia. Is it positive or negative that Donald Trump tried to institute regime change in Venezuela?
I think so. The U.S. has a very unfortunate relationship with South America. We should stop meddling there.
Ron, I'm being very specific in regards to Russia. You made a claim that Donald Trump was under Russia's thumb. I'm engaging this.
Well, I wouldn't say Russia's thumb, but I would say he shows deference to Russia. That kind of defies.
But I've given you two examples.
Yeah. Well,
I can go further. What about Syria? So we are literally.
I don't know about Syria. Venezuela, I would say we should never have massive Venezuela. Obviously, we didn't really know what we were doing. It hasn't worked out.
Ron, what are you talking about? When Donald Trump got in office, he tried to institute regime change in Venezuela using Juan Guaido as a patsy of the United States. Russia was against it. China was against it. The Western powers were for it.
I was against messing with Guaido. I was against putting Guaido in.
I understand that you're against it. I'm making an argument that if Donald Trump is indeed either under his thumb, all of those things, then it seems that deference was not paid attention to when he tried to get his political ambitions in Venezuela or Syria or Iran, meaning this notion of potentially attacking Iran and getting rid of the international, the ballistic treaties, not to mention the weapons in space. I don't understand the deference.
I'm sorry, the difference.
No, deference. You're saying that he shows deference, and I'm giving you all of these examples where Trump has taken positions that are absolutely against Russian interests and what Russia wants. What about the Ukraine? Obama wouldn't go as far as arming the Ukrainians. Does that mean Obama shows deference to Putin in that case?
Obama definitely had some gaps in his.
Is he showing deference to Putin because he wouldn't arm the Ukrainians?
No, he was showing deference to the people who helped him get in office.
But they wouldn't have been against him arming the Ukrainians. I mean, they're attacking Trump now because he wouldn't send over the very specific weapons that they want to attack tanks and kill Russians. I'm making the point to you that the Democratic Party has taken a particular point of view that the media has pushed. And the media has never engaged this from the standpoint of maybe they're wrong. I am making the point to you that they are wrong. Ultimately, it's not so much that I believe that Donald Trump is not corrupt. That's not really it.
He's part of his corruption.
Right. He's corrupt through and through. It's not even, I think, that Donald Trump is honest. He lies flagrantly. But I am making the point to you that Democrats have taken a particular tint towards him that the media has gone along with, of this notion of him working with the Russians. The Mueller investigation came back and didn't give them the result that they wanted. They didn't care that the Mueller investigation didn't give them the result that they wanted. At some point, I even heard them saying Mueller is even in the bed and all this stuff. Like that's insane. You realize that the majority of the stuff that they're saying was put out by the Russian company or whatever happened after the election? I mean, not to mention that company was in existence beforehand. Is it possible to any degree that's possible? Say, for example, you have a company that's, a capitalistic company that tries to maximize their profit like any other company. Sure. And that company comes around during an election and they start putting out all of these clickbait stuff to get people to click on it because they're a clickbait company that just so happens to go in context with the election. I mean, my channel, when the election comes up, we go into the flow of the election and we start getting extremely political in regards to the content. But that's because you tether whatever you're doing in regards to whatever is taking place. Meaning the company that they're saying are Russians, and they're saying that this company was somehow working with Vladimir Putin. These guys are clickbait farms. I mean, the people even came on Chris Hayes to explain, look, this is a clickbait farm. These guys are making it look like they're trying to attack the United States. What about Butima? Maria Butima. They call that woman a sex spy and said that she was in the United States in order to sell sex and all this stuff. They didn't charge her with that at all. They didn't charge her with espionage at all. They charged her for what? Not filing as an agent? And it wasn't even the typical way. They charged her in this kind of weird ruling in order to catch quote-unquote sleeper agents. They didn't say you were going to put you in jail for all this time unless, you either choose or go to jail. Her thought was, oh my God, this country is viciously racist and they're going to convict me because I'm a Russian. So yeah, I'll take whatever deal you give me so I can get out of here. Like, I'm giving you a secondary opinion that you never get on mainstream media. That's kind of my point to you, Ron. Like, it's easy to say that stuff. I've lost friends over this because I find it to be brutally racist. It's this notion. I am not blissfully unaware in the sense that countries do politics. Meaning, I wouldn't be shocked if Russia tried to push the needle in some way. All countries do it. All powers do it. So I wouldn't be, oh my God, I'm shocked by that. That wouldn't do that. Right, it's a norm to some degree. But if it is a norm to some degree, how are we this hysterical about this? And my original point was that the Democratic Party never accepted the result of the election and they screamed Russia, as opposed to, I would have even been okay if they screamed Republicans, that Republicans were gaming the system in regards to interstate cross-check and that type of stuff. I would have been on it. Yes, great. Cutting voter totals, voter ID laws, all of these things to shave off the totals just enough. Because if you look at the voting, Clinton lost in states by very few amounts that she needed to win, like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, those type of things. And some of that was because they shaved the voter rolls. Like there were tens of thousands of people that just shaved off the voter rolls, and she won by, she lost by a certain amount. My only argument is this. This is not a rah-rah Putin or anything else. This is a pointing out that the Democratic Party, just like the Republican Party, is trying to blame others for their own failings. In their case, not accepting the election result from the standpoint of Clinton losing and from the standpoint of Trump blaming immigrants for their issue. Both sides are trying to blame things external to the country because they don't want to deal with their own failings. That's my point. And I am not going to point at Russia when, I don't know if there's gaming. Maybe not. I got to be honest, I don't even all that much care. I want paper ballots. So if you care about it, let's do something about it. They are not doing something about it.
And go to paper ballots.
Paper ballots, yes.
Key pieces.
And by the way, whoever you vote for, like I am one of those people who hate voter shaming, and there are Democrats who get angry at Trump supporters and call them racist and bigoted and all this other stuff. They do this because they want to tar the image of the candidate and, that type of thing. Problem is, Trump is racist and misogynist and all those things. So he makes it that much more worse. But you can't say that about all of his voters because we don't necessarily know the reasons that people vote. People vote for all sorts of reasons.
Sure.
Some people voted because they couldn't stand Clinton. Some people voted because they wanted to punish the Democratic Party.
Voters. Yeah, there's plenty of people who do that.
Right, there are plenty of people who do it. But I cannot, as a flat fact, say, and I would definitely not say, that he got elected because of some kind of Russian interference. That's a Democratic talking point that they use to try to explain why she failed. And from the standpoint of his quote-unquote deference to Russia, maybe. I mean, the Helsinki thing, he was a little bit more,
a little bit more.
Yeah, and when he came back into the country, he looked like he was reading a hostage note. He was kind of looking down at the paper trying to explain. But deference to me comes across as all of these various elements around the globe, he's working in their interests. And I gave you like 6 where he wasn't, and there were big, big deals. Like Syria and our engagement in Syria. Trump made the campaign pledge, I want to get our troops out. Well, that's not him being deference. That's him literally on the campaign trail saying, I'm going to do X, and he gets in office and tries to do that. I don't know the deference thing, and I don't know significance of it, and I would put the point that many Democrats have gotten this so far in their heads that looking at this from the standpoint of, okay, maybe it's not deference in the way that we think, in the sense that he is doing things that is out of kilter with what they want. Like, I have the tendency to read, to watch media across the world. China, Russia, Venezuelan, like that type of stuff, Iranian. And I was watching this clip of Vladimir Putin talking about the U.S. And there's always propaganda in that part just because he's a political leader, just like our leaders give out propaganda. Trump killing Abu Dhabi, talking about, he ran terrified in the corner like a coward and that type of stuff. That stuff is nonsense. The president should never say that. It's embarrassing. But Putin was making this point, when you get rid of all that, this is dead serious. You guys are breaching our borders. Donald Trump right now is trying to get Ukraine in NATO. Think about what that means. You're talking about expanding NATO to the border of Russia, a country that's been invaded, where 20 million people died in those last wars with invasions by Western powers, including by the U.S. in World War I. People forget that. You're talking about, we've invaded the country, one. We've expanded the borders of the country, meaning NATO expanded when NATO said supposedly it was never supposed to expand. We blew that off. Like you said, Gorbachev was a poor negotiator. It's not that he was a poor negotiator. He was a sucker, in the sense that he thought the U.S. could honor its word and not expand NATO to the borders. The Soviet Union goes belly up. What does the U.S. do? The next president comes in. It's like, yeah, screw that. That was the other president. We're going to expand. And they expand the borders of NATO further and further and further and further in. Now, what does this look like to Russia for the moment? Think about it. What does this look like to Russia? You have a country an organization that is literally made to destroy you, getting closer and closer to your borders, and then getting rid of all of these various treaties that gets across of whether or not you can launch missiles and how soon and that type of stuff. It looks like a hostile action.
Yeah, I got that.
We don't look at that from those terms. We look at it from our terms. But look at it from their terms. Borders are expanding. And if any of the countries attacked, all of the countries respond. So closer and closer, you've inched around and essentially strangling the country. A country that's been invaded multiple times.
Yeah.
John F. Kennedy was willing to end the world when those missiles were in Cuba. And we have expanded to their borders. And you're telling me about election interference? I guess my point is, I don't know what's going on with Trump and the Russians. I do know what is taking place, and he is taking one provocative action after the next. And I put to you that arming the Ukrainians, something that Obama would have never done. Obama recoiled off of that. He wouldn't dare do that, because what Obama knew was that those weapons are going to be used to kill Russians. They were arming Nazis. Trump was, in the Ukraine, who were out there doing flag burning ceremonies, people who standing beside John McCain and whatnot. Nazis, outright Nazis, not the stuff here. Real things. In the Ukraine, in the media, Western media, pretended as if that wasn't taking place. This is extraordinary. Yes, I get a little perturbed with this because I've heard Democrats make those jabs before and can never back it up. I've yet to talk to a Democrat that backs that up. All of them would just say it flippantly. And it's like, yeah, but what do you have to back that up? Well, I mean, he did what? He did what? He was in a meeting with Putin and didn't, there was no notes. So was Reagan. Well, yeah, but Trump's different. How? He's taking one provocative action after the next. And it's like all of these actions have gotten us closer and closer to war. The best thing that Trump did was pulling out of Syria. I don't like the way he did it. It's none of our business to be there. And then you turn around and say we're stealing the oil. Trump should be impeached for that. A president of the United States that comes out and says, we're leaving, great. Oh, by the way, I'm stealing their oil. I'm going to defend the oil. Who are you defending the oil from, Trump?
Yeah, that was
Not odd. It's not odd. What's odd about Iran is that he said it.
Yes, it's odd that he said it.
He said it.
He loves his dishonesty. He's very proud of his dishonesty.
But it's weird that he's honest about something he should never be honest about. That's
refreshing.
Well,
refreshing.
But here's the catch. That statement should get him impeached. Ultimately, the United States has said, we invaded a country, and I'm going by what Trump said. Trump comes out and says, Obama instituted a regime change war. That's what he said. Which means that Obama was working with terrorists. I can show you the articles from the New York Times, Washington Post, all of these guys. Get that across. Obama was arming terrorists. New York Times, the CIA, inside the $1 billion CIA program to take down Assad. I mean, he admitted that the last president had invaded a country to work with terrorists in order to knock down another government. Explain to me, is our military supposed to do that? Is that legal?
No, but it's been going on for the last 100 years.
I know, but a president has just admitted that the last president did it, and there's all sorts of evidence showing that he's right, meaning Obama tried to use terrorists, head choppers, and rapists something that caused 500,000 lives. He has 500,000 lives on his conscience, literally.
Yeah, just like Bush and Cheney.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Little
agree.
perhaps, yeah.
No, I agree, absolutely agree. Bush and Cheney was different because they literally just attacked the country with the military. I'm making the very specific point that Trump has just admitted that the previous president was instituted in a regime change war to take down the government of Syria, the rightful government of Syria. I don't care what Obama thought of the government of Syria. There are plenty of governments that you could dislike. Is it the responsibility of the U.S. military, who is putting on the uniform for the defense of this nation, to go to take down another country?
They didn't ask me.
The answer is no. That's illegal. That's illegal. That's massively illegal for a president to do that. He has no just cause, which is the reason why Obama never said that. Meaning Obama didn't come out and say, yeah, we're going to go over there, regime change and pay terrorists and all this other stuff.
No, they always think of good cover.
Yes. The catch here is the new president, current president, let the cat out of the bag.
Mm-hmm.
How can that not be investigated and prosecuted, seeing it is vigorously against our laws?
Yeah, I'd like to see it go back 30 years.
Agree, but let's start here.
Starting with Reagan, yeah.
Okay, but let's start here. Should Obama be indicted and investigated if he was responsible for arming terrorists in Syria?
I don't think you can arrest the president for something he did.
He's not the president.
Theoretically, in the national is a
Wait.
national-
He's not the president.
No, but he was the president at that time. He made
But he's
that
not now.
decision. No, but he made that decision at that time.
I know,
If
but
he did
wait.
it now,
But that doesn't
right
matter.
now-
The president, once he gets out of office, can be held for stuff that he's done.
Oh,
All right, let's take a call. It's 6:30. Let's take a call.
all right.
All right, so we're gonna do a phone call.
WIWK-FM, who's calling, please?
All right, so we're gonna take some calls. There was a call that took place
Would you
earlier.
like to be on there with Jamarl?
Excellent. What's his name? Daniel?
Daniel, yes.
What's going on, Daniel?
One second, Daniel. Hang on a
Oh,
second.
let's see if we put it in.
Sorry. Go ahead.
What's going on, Daniel?
Hi, Jamal. I think that you just were speaking with your coworker Ron,
Yes.
and my concern is something, term called the narrative, right? So your coworker Ron piped up about Trump being under the thumb of Putin. I would call that
More or less.
the term the narrative.
Yeah, I agree.
So the question that I would have for Ron is, 3 years ago, somebody like Ron would never think to suggest that the President of the United States is an asset of a foreign government. That's completely new. And it's an impact of the liberal press focus on this thing called the narrative, which they've been actively co-opting, you know?
Yeah, I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. That's why I react strongly to this, because I don't buy it. I mean, media, look, propaganda. If you're in India, and Daniel, thank you, man. I appreciate your call. If we were in India right now, there's the thing going on in Kashmir. Now, the thing that's going on in Kashmir, essentially, I think it was the revocation of Article, 320 or 370, I forget the number. But basically, a Muslim community no longer has autonomy. That was the only Muslim community that had autonomy in India. And they flooded it with military. They burlap sacked various people, meaning community leaders, business leaders, anybody that would have had any issue at all, got those people out of the country. Other media reported it. Indian media didn't report it that way. Why? Because it was pertinent to India. And because it was pertinent to India, the press fell in line and went along with this notion that, oh, these guys were terrorists, or we're just kind of getting these guys out of the way. Well, that's not entirely true. But India wasn't going to report it that way. I make the point that media can be...
He's back.
Oh, Daniel?
Yeah.
Oh, he has something else to say? Oh, what else, Daniel? I didn't know you had something else to say. I guess my point is this. Media, be it in Britain, be it in the United States, are often complicit with political aims. Now, the catch here is they had a very specific intent, and they had a very specific perspective, that perspective being we hate Trump's guts, and we are going to take a narrative as such. That's problematic, especially when it went in line with the Democratic Party and what they were pushing. If you remember, the book shattered. On the day after, a couple of days after the election, Hillary Clinton was trying to resolve, the fact that she failed to a reality show host. And she comes up to the conclusion, I know, I didn't lose because of my own failings. I lost because of Comey and Russia. And she told her media people to push that out. And they did exactly that. And the media ran with the story. Our president is under the power of a foreign power. The Steele dossier ends up getting stovepiped into the intelligence services and then immediately leaked. Like, I don't know if you know this. Comey, Brennan, and all these guys from Obama's era went to Trump and said, look, we have a dossier. And we're not going to let this out between you and us. But, we're investigating claims. Now, at this point, they knew the dossier was dodgy. They knew it was full of it. That was the Steele dossier. And that dossier was paid for initially by a Republican, eventually given over to Clinton, and eventually piped and the DNC. Exactly. As a FISA warrant. Exactly. That's my point. Like, this stuff gets popped up. Do you know, on 2017 in January, Richard Engel was talking to Rachel Maddow. Richard Engel went to Rachel Maddow, and Richard Engel said, look, we have been scouring to try to figure out whether this is true or not. This stuff has been floating around for months. We have been dragging down leads. We have even went to people who was leaking this stuff and said, give us the evidence. We need to see it. I mean, otherwise, and he says, we haven't been able to track this stuff down. This stuff has seemed to be, made up. And it seems like somebody wanted to get this out in order to ding the president before the election. Didn't stop Maddow for the next 3 years screaming about Trump and Russia. All I'm saying is,
reporter saying they don't see any real basis, and the establishment saying we don't care, we're going to go with it anyhow.
Yeah. I mean, it's a narrative, and that narrative, for the most part, has been able to propagate itself and get instantiated into the public consciousness. I mean, whether the public cares about it or not, the narrative is still there.
I guess it was
What that serves the purpose of is the establishment of the Democratic Party preventing themselves from having to look at what they did in the 2016 election because Russia, right?
Yes. It's an excuse. I mean, that's...
HRC may be re-entering the race, and it seems to me that would be impossible if they actually looked at what happened in the 2016 election.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I don't think Clinton would enter unless Biden failed. Like, if something happened with Biden. I mean, did you hear about that story?
I can't imagine her. I can't imagine that.
Yeah, I mean, well, the story came up. I think it was the New York Times that they were looking for somebody else. Like they were like, "Is this all we have?" Now, the weird part about this is, right? The weird part is, you have 22 people in the race, and they're like, "Is this it?" Yeah. Right? Who else? And they said that Clinton was making the point that if there was a lane for her, but she would have to see a pathway. The catch is, if Biden was out of it, would she enter? Like, if Biden got out the race for whatever reason. Go ahead. No, make your last point.
Hillary Clinton had, we learned from Donna Brazil in her book that she had these legal agreements, a joint fundraising agreement, and a memorandum of understanding, essentially giving her control of the Democratic Party.
Yes.
Legally. We haven't had any kind of investigation about those agreements, and it seems to me there's no reason to think that those legal agreements are not still in effect, and that Hillary Clinton is not still legally in control of the Democratic Party. Somebody show me any basis to think that I'm wrong about that.
So here's...
If I'm not, that's very serious.
Well, that's a good point, but here's the catch. And again, I thank you, man. I thank you for calling in. I appreciate the call and the comment. So here's the catch. Not everybody knows this. And people might be aghast to hear this, but the Democratic Party is a corporation. It's like a buzz or something like that. Do you hear it? Well, at this point, yeah, almost. But yeah, man, thank you for the call. I appreciate it. Have a good one. So the Democratic Party, believe it or not, if it wants, can have those agreements. Mm-hmm. It's not against the law. The Democratic Party, believe it or not, is a corporation.
It's just a club.
It's just it's a corporation. It's a business.
Yeah.
And as a corporation, it can make any agreement that he won in those contexts. The catch is when the Democratic Party is going through its primary process, as a corporation, it could set that stuff up in all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
The catch is the Democratic Party in court was right. They could choose a candidate in the smoke-filled room if they wanted to. The only reason they don't do it is because they know you won't vote for the person. However, they can make the rules however they want. If they want to have that agreement in place, they can have that agreement in place. It is unethical as all get out. And I would imagine people will recoil if they knew that, meaning, like one of the things that was taking place, Clinton was raising money hand over fist through various state parties. And because of state parties, I think you can give over $335,000 or something like that with the notion that the money is going to the states. Because Clinton was in charge of the DNC, the money stopped by the states and then get laundered into New York, meaning her campaign. 1% of the money that she was raising was going to the various state parties. And this was while she was attacking Sanders, saying that, oh, this guy's not even a real Democrat. This guy's not giving money back. Well, she was bringing that money in-house. She was funneling the money to her. So I get your point. The thing is, that part seems to be illegal just because it's money laundering. But from the standpoint of the deals that these guys make in the party, they can do whatever they want. They're a corporation. I mean, honestly, the argument in court.
Yeah, sad.
Yeah, it's sad. The argument in court is as unsatisfying as it was for the lawyers to say we can choose a candidate, smoke for a room if we want. We can lie, cheat, and everything else. It's true.
And we have.
Yeah, it's true. It sucks. It's funny when Ron told me earlier that somebody said I was too anti-Trump. The odd part is people tell me otherwise. My mom yells at me, how can you support that guy? I was like, I don't support that guy. Now, the reason she said that is because when this stuff is all entirely ideology for me. And I'm honest about it. And I'm honest about it in a way of saying, this is what I believe in, and how does this match up? So when Trump kills the TPP, I applaud Trump. If I'm not mistaken, I did a video applauding him. When Trump said we're getting out of Syria, I did a video applauding him. When, never mind, he's not getting out, he's pulling those people to the west and he's sending troops back in. When he did the thing of, right, we're going to do this. And then you find out, wait, you're sending those guys to Iraq? By the way, Iraq is saying that those troops can't stay there and has tried to get UN help to get those troops out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're not tolerating that well. I mean, at this point, they remember that we killed 1 million of their people. Yeah. They're not blissfully unaware of that. And so whatever government that we are organized with, they're not going to be feeling all that well about it. Look, if he does something I like, I applaud him. And I say that to say that it's not partisan in the sense that I'm working in the context of a party where I just hit or and don't give him any credit for stuff he does.
No, you're not knee-jerk. You have a substantiation for your ideas.
Right. Yeah. Him killing Baghdadi, and I come out and says, he killed Baghdadi, and Democrats were like, oh, we don't want to give him credit for this nonsense. And Joe Biden went out talking about, GM is alive and Obama died, Bin Laden died, vote me back in office. Like, you can't have it both ways. My argument, even being against impeachment, is based on this notion that selective justice is not justice. If Lula in Brazil committed a crime and the prosecution goes after him and puts him in jail, and you find out later that the prosecution decided to go after him entirely for political reasons, and that all of these other people who are around him are also guilty as sin, and they made a political choice to go after one over the other and say, well, that guy did something, so we're going after him. And you said, well, wait a minute. You didn't go after those other people. And not just not go after those other people, you intentionally went after him to stop him from being in the election. Selective. Even if he committed a crime, the political apparatus itself is being used to attack one while ignoring others. My argument is that's not really justice. I don't buy this impeachment stuff. I mean, we went with a conspiracy theory for 3 years, and now they're leaking this kind of drip-drop impeachment stuff where they selectively, they have this non-transparent process and they're just kind of leaking this stuff up. I read the call from the Ukraine. I don't see it. I think it's problematic. I don't want any president or any political party working with a foreign government in order to ding any of the candidates. Yeah. However, that is also true for Democrats working with the Ukraine to do the same thing to Trump. Like, that's problematic. I don't understand how an impeachment process can be made when they let Bush off. Bush screamed about torture, not to mention invaded a country and killing 1 million people and 4,000 Americans and $7 trillion. I don't know how you let him off on that. How does he walk on that? And on top of that, when Joe Biden gets on stage and says, I held the money for the aid package until he fired the prosecutor, and he's bragging about it. And then they come to me and say Trump had a quid pro quo, and I'm saying, well, wait a minute, so did Biden. And then they try to excuse it and saying, well, I mean, the difference is that guy was corrupt. So wait, the U.S. can use an aid package in order to get rid of somebody who was in the government of another country because they think something about that particular person. Yes. Okay. It loses credibility. It loses credibility. Like, even, it loses credibility. These guys are partisan actors going after Trump. And I find this process to lack, let's say, credibility in the way and the people who are going about it. I strongly suspect Nancy Pelosi was not for this, and that she was dragged into this by the elements of a party. And whatever you want to think about Nancy Pelosi, I'm going to call it cutthroat Pelosi, because if you're looking at this purely in a political sense, tie him up in knots and have one investigation to the next that locks him from doing pretty much anything. The catch in this is Durham, and I support Durham 1,000%. So Barr is looking into the origins of Russiagate. God bless. It's not that I think Barr is great or anything else. God bless that he's looking into the origins of Russiagate. This country has been raptured into a conspiracy theory for 3 years. It is important to know why. How did it start? And if you tell me that it's important to investigate Trump, then I'm going to say it's also important to investigate the origins of Russiagate. How did it start? Mueller didn't get his guy. And if Mueller didn't get his guy, how did all of this take place? Durham's job is to get to the bottom of the origins of Russiagate. Durham initially was looking into it. It has now become a criminal inquiry, which means that he has the power to subpoena, and there can be criminal charges pressed against people who might have been involved in behavior that was duplicitous, or at the very least didn't go for the betterment of the country, meaning doing things that they had no business doing in order to hurt Trump in his run. I'm not anybody's supporter outside of, in the sense of party. I need to make that very clear. I look at both being the problem. Corruption in both, and the fact that money and politics essentially buys these guys. Not to mention they tend to be partisan actors in a way that engage, and especially now. There doesn't seem to be a democratic order. It seemed to ultimately be each party not accepting the election result. It just so happened to be Democratic Party this time. And by the way, Democratic Party doing this right now is setting the precedent for what takes place when Republicans take power again. Mark my words. This process and the way this process has gone will have consequences going forward in regards to the way the politics are going. And Republicans, don't cry too hard because you did the same thing or something similar when tying Obama up in knots. Democrats might have just upped the ante. I'm bothered by this because I'm concerned about this. This does not go for good ends. Certainly, this can't perpetuate itself going like this.
No, there's no future in this.
There's no future in this. This is a crippled government. A Democrat gets in office and Republicans immediately have one hearing after the next to try to take down a Democrat, find anything they can find on the Democrat, then have hearings to try to get him impeached, whether there's a legitimacy to it or not. Republicans could have did the same thing with Obama. You realize that? They took the House and the Senate, and they could have came up with something. They could have said, with the greatest hypocrisy ever, Obama was funding terrorists, and that's against the law. And we're going to go after him. Now, they wouldn't say that because they want their guy to be able to do the exact same thing when he gets in office.
Yeah.
But I'm making the point that they could find something on him to tie him up in knots in investigations. And the next Democrat that gets in office, I will wager to you that this will happen also.
Yeah, the whole thing is compromise is cesspool. But I think it's vital that people turn out and vote and demonstrate to the parties that we are not going to be daunted by their falling away from their ideals, but we're going to be stimulated to not only vote, but probably begin to turn out. And
Vote,
D.C.,
vote for who?
in our cities, vote for the party that does the least damage to the world.
So least worse.
Yeah, the least worse. Yeah.
So one guy
It's
says,
not like you can find, this isn't a God against the devil. This is two warring parties who want to take the place over for their own ends.
one guy said, I want to build 5 concentration camps. The guy said, I want to build 4, vote for the guy that builds 4 concentration camps.
The one that does the least damage and the most potential good. Yeah.
Vote for the guy that's building 4 concentration camps over 5?
Well, that's not the deal we have to make today. That would be an awful deal. Yeah.
Nope.
If that was a multiple choice question, that would be neither answer would be correct. But it's not. The choice we have is we have a group with a demonstrated record of what they would like to do with the country and with our kids' future. We have
Right.
another group that claims to have a higher standard. Oh, who knows? But you should go with your conscience. Find the group that will do the least damage or the most good.
That's not a who knows question, Ron. That's an objective reality question. I mean, ultimately,
Yeah.
you can look at the works. Did Obama deliver hope and change?
Obama delivered us from 2008 without finding anything wrong with anybody who participated in the great stealing of 2008.
I don't know if that's a yes or no. Oftentimes you answer these questions without yes or no when I'm asking you very specific questions. Did Obama deliver hope and change?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. If Obama didn't deliver hope and change, and people voted on him with this notion that he was going to deliver hope and change, should you put the next person back in office that's a Democrat who's essentially promising something similar?
Well, you have two alternatives. You have one who does one thing and has done one thing over time, and you have the other who's done things over time, and you just kind of have to decide.
Hillary Clinton was responsible for Libya. She was responsible for the Iraq War vote, meaning she made that Iraq War vote.
I'm not voting for her. If she were on the ballot, we'd have another conversation.
She was on the ballot in 2016.
She's on the ballot now.
I'm just saying she was on the ballot in 2016.
Yes, she was. And it was really hard to get people to vote for her. It's a wonder that she didn't just take with a landslide, but she and Bill had accumulated some baggage. And they've been under attack for years. And
now that part's true.
I mean, they had a machine in place to make sure they had no stature. On the other hand, Bill had a machine in place to make sure he always had fresh women around. It was really hard to defend him.
I did a video the other day where I made the point. Bill Clinton's picture, his presidential portrait. In the background, there's the dress with the stain on it.
Oh, really?
It's a shadow. It's in a shadow, but it's back there. And I was like, for all those people who say that Trump, debauched the office, look back, buddy.
Trump is late to the game.
Right, Trump is late to the game.
I don't think there were many presidents that didn't have a full life.
Problem is, there wasn't YouTube and Twitter, and at the very least, back during that time, they were less likely to bring that up for the dignity of the office. Republicans didn't care; they went after him.
Well, there was a time when the country maybe mattered more, but you don't have to go back very far. You can way back. Really, ever since Lincoln was assassinated, there's been corruption has been the order of the day.
Yeah.
And it's bounced back and forth. When you have a war, you get a little more ethical, and then you
like edge your way. Yeah.
As long as you let business run the country, it's going to be strictly
for
monetary
business.
thing,
Yeah.
and the rest will be just pure excuses. And I say, when you vote, you have to vote. Vote for the group that will do the least harm, or the most good.
See, I disagree. I think you should vote for the people who are based on your ideology. And there may be times where you vote. I voted for Stein. I couldn't dare vote for Clinton. I mean, she cheated my guy. And based on my own political disposition, I look at this and say, what I want affected upon the world is not done with voting for Clinton in office. Now, somebody can make the least worst argument. I would argue that it is least worse to not vote Clinton, especially because think of where you are now in your political disposition, meaning our world. With Clinton in office, do you get this conversation on Medicare for all or expanding Social Security and everything else? And I understand there are consequences for Trump, so don't misunderstand me. I'm not looking at those lightly. It's more so the world that I want doesn't happen with Clinton in office, and she perpetuates a system that keeps it the way it is. Meaning, all of these people...
Luckily, she's not on the ballot, but go ahead.
But she was in 2016, Ryan.
Yes, she was.
But that's kind of my point. If we're talking about... what's the difference between Biden and Clinton?
Age? Sex?
Just sex. One has a penis, the other has a vagina. Politically, they're pretty much the same. So even though Clinton is not on the ballot...
I've never been that fond of Joe myself.
I'm not a fan of Joe. I guess my point is what Clinton represents, be it from the standpoint of war, be it from the standpoint of domestic policy, is embodied by Joe Biden. They're, for the most part, the same person.
I don't plan to vote for Joe, but I'm going to vote for the party that will cause the least damage. I think ideology is a nice thing. However, we have a very pragmatic system here. Our political process has lost its compass.
Yes.
And I think you have to vote strategically. I'm sorry to say it, but that's how I see it.
Trump and Biden. Okay, Trump and Biden.
Well, if I had to vote for Trump and Biden, I would probably vote for the one that would do the least damage.
Who is that?
Well,
because, by the way, who does the least damage is subjective. That's not an absolute.
That's right. That's why I can't really tell you at this moment in time. But I would look at the records and who's done the most good for the world, who's done the least good for the world, and I would vote accordingly.
I like that dodge.
Yeah,
because I will be honest with you, and I would just say I vote according to who I think is more ideal. And sometimes who's more ideal, it's not a momentary thing. I mean, look at your political process. You've slid further and further to the right over the last 20 years because Democrats realize that people will vote for a D if it has a can of soup if it had a D beside its name. That has not been a productive process at all. That process if you're right, it's ended up with Trump over the course of years, meaning it's not an individual thing. It's not something that takes place in one particular election. You're talking about the context of time. And if that decision-making process has ended you up with Trump, how is that a positive decision-making process?
I don't think it's a process that it is with Trump. I think what happened with Trump was that Trump's record was totally eclipsed by noise and fervor and distraction. We never got around to talking about facts. If we were talking about facts, we'd say who's done the most good, who's done the least good. Would have been simple, but we didn't. We talked about nothing but, it was like cats
It'll be
chasing
simple.
a laser. Had nothing to do with facts. We did not entertain any facts during the whole election campaign. It was all about personalities and honours. Had nothing to do with how you run a country. It was all pure noise.
I massively disagree with you.
I'm tempted to draw into the vernacular those nasty words where people aren't supposed to use on air because it was a pile of hooey.
Massively
But
disagree.
we're out of time.
But we are out of time. This is 93.9 FM The Work. Guys, I want to thank you for joining me this evening with my host, Ron. And I will be back on Tuesday from 5 to 7 in the drive time hour. You guys, have a good evening. Thanks all.
And thanks for listening, folks. We return you to the programming is going to be Voices of the Community. Deep dive. It's going to be a deep dive. So have fun. And sorry I couldn't go any further with this, but obviously this will be continued.
All right, let's do super chats. Josephine Paleru, wow. Josephine Paleru, wow, hard to watch them all with censorship. Charles Cavan, it should help like Stormy Daniels helped Trump. I don't know what that one means, Charles. Xavier Foster, the operation against Baghdadi was Kayla Muller. Xavier Foster, I'm a black Trump supporter. DNC lost me in 2017. They lost me in 2016 too, Xavier. So I feel you on that one. Guys, I want to thank you all for joining me. I don't know if I'm going to do shows this evening, but like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all.